The human body is an amazing form. If you live to 60 years old and don't have diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, then there is a very good chance you could live to 60 years old. At 67, I wonder what my life will be like as I age. Treating blood pressure, diabetes, and heart disease all prolong your journey and improve morbidity and mortality. But let's face it, parts of our body will start to fail as sure as the parts of an old car. The visit to the doctor once a year only provides a narrow glimpse of our health to detect those wearing out parts. It is possible to provide our medical team with more data which could identify problems earlier. This is the future of wearable technology and our topic for today's presentation. I am Ron Brown with Silvercom Computer and Technology Club. The title of the presentation today is Saving Your Life with Wearable Technology. This is given at the Virtual Technology Conference on November 2nd, 2019. The goal of this presentation is to teach you two common medical conditions that will lead to incapacitation or stroke. How wearable technology can help you identify those conditions and seek medical help. First of all, a disclaimer. The information in this presentation are my thoughts. They are not the views of any organization. They're not meant to be any personal medical advice. You should always check with your healthcare professional before changing any treatment plan. And the people in this presentation are fictitious and do not portray any member of our community. Now, if you look on the left side of the screen, I got this slide a few months ago, and it predicted global wearable medical device market will grow by 10.3 billion a year to 66 billion in 2026. 2 days ago, CNBC reported the following. For this year, the wearables will be set to $41 billion, with next year being $52 billion. Recently, as I toured around Best Buy, Costco, Staples, computer sales places, I found huge parts of their stores now devoted to wearable technology. This is a huge field and is going to grow rapidly. The global wearable computing leading manufacturers are listed on the left side of the slide, but you will probably have read in the paper Google just purchased Fitbit for $2.1 billion. The term wearable technology really encompasses step trackers, smartwatches, GPS trackers, and precision trackers. Wearable devices let us do everything from communicate easier to monitor biological data. You see that glasses will help the blind. We even have a bra that can detect breast cancer. We're going to be talking a lot today about the Apple Watch. We also have bio patches that we can wear now that measure a lot of physiologic functions of the body. These provide data back to our healthcare professionals to better monitor our bodily physiology. Even red wine, the tannins in red wine are now being used to produce artificial skin. This allows us to put sensors into artificial skin and use it in the pediatric age group. Pediatric skin is always difficult to attach devices to, but artificial skin makes this easier. All right, let's talk about our fictitious patient. Mary is 74, widowed, and lives full-time at Silver Ridge RV Resort, where I am right now. Mary has lived at Silver Ridge for 7 years and has won the hearts of all the residents. Everybody has a Mary. She lives by herself in a park model with an Arizona room and has a very good friend across the street who she walks with at 9 a.m. every morning. Alice and Mary walk around the Silveridge perimeter and then have a cup of tea. Mary is very active and is a member of the pickleball club. Her highlight of the year is Monday morning meetings at Silvercom Computer and Technology Club. You see Mary in the top left-hand corner and Alice in the bottom right. Mary has been widowed for 12 years. Her daughter Meg is an accountant and lives in Palm Desert, but comes to visit once a month. Mary has pretty good computer skills and Skypes frequently with Meg. Mary doesn't drive anymore and uses Uber for transportation. Now, Mary's health. Mary likes Dr. Jones, who has been her family physician for the past 12 years. Mary sees him twice a year at his office by Fry's on Ellsworth Avenue. Mary is overweight and on a mild blood pressure pill. On her last exam, Dr. Jones found her to be in excellent health, and I would note that her blood pressure and pulse were normal. Mary told Dr. Jones about her daily walks with Alice and would like to try and get an extra game of pickleball to lose some weight. Now, on July 2nd in the summer, Mary was walking home from the mailroom and felt a bit lightheaded. She had no chest pain or palpitation, but sits down on the grass. John comes by in his golf cart and asks if she's okay. She gets up and feels fine, but he insists on taking her home in the golf cart. The lightheaded feeling is gone, and John phones later to make sure she is fine. Meg calls and Mary promises to see Dr. Jones tomorrow. So she sees Dr. Jones tomorrow. Her symptoms have gone and she feels fine. Dr. Jones finds her exam to be entirely normal. Of specific, her blood pressure and pulse were entirely normal. I think it was reasonable they decided, since this was the first episode, that no further investigations were needed. On Monday, July 17th, Mary was cooking supper. This is a few days later, and felt a similar lightheaded feeling lasting for 30 minutes. She had no chest pain or palpitations, and the symptoms went away when she rested in her lazy boy chair. She saw Dr. Jones, who again found nothing wrong, but did an ECG, which was normal. Because this was Mary's second episode, they decided to do some investigations, which would include some blood work and sort of a heart monitor test. Now, Mary had Meg coming on Friday, so she wanted to do the test next week. She had some baking to do to prepare for Meg's visit. On Wednesday at 2:30 in the morning, Mary got out of bed. While getting off the toilet, she had another attack. She fell to the floor and heard a crack in her right hip. She was in terrible pain and wedged between the toilet and shower. She couldn't move and called for help, but no one came. Alice found Mary the next day at around 9 a.m. when she came for a walk. When the EMS arrived, Mary was hypothermic. She had a low temperature with a low pulse of 46, and she was in shock with a low blood pressure. On arrival to Banner Hospital, she had a temporary pacemaker inserted in the emergency department. She was transferred to ICU, where she was stabilized and had a permanent pacemaker. Her hip was repaired to the delight of everyone, and Mary had an uneventful recovery. She is back doing her daily walks with Alice, but has given up pickleball. What was Mary's diagnosis? What could Mary have done to be better prepared for a medical emergency? What were clues in her history that could be expanded on? Let's look at some of those. Today we get to talk about the heart. Now, there's probably about 4 things that can go wrong with your heart. The 3 things that you see on the screen we're not going to talk about. You probably have heard of coronary artery disease. This is where your arteries get plugged up. You may need surgery, a stent, or you may need to take cholesterol pills. There's also valvular disease. As you get older, the 4 valves in your heart can get diseased and maybe need to be replaced. There's also a myocarditis, which is a sickness of an infection of the heart muscle. These 3 conditions we're not going to talk about today because they are not part of this presentation. But what we are going to talk about is the electrical wiring of the heart. Now, normally in medical school, it takes medical students about 6 years to appreciate this. But today, with modern technology, I'm going to teach you what you need to know in 90 seconds. So I want you to look at the right side of the diagram here, and you'll see this is a circuit breaker. You all have these in your house. And you know the circuit breaker can either be in an open or closed position. Open, the electricity flows. Close, the electricity stops. So let's look over at the heart. The heart has 4 chambers. There's the top 2 chambers that contract together and the bottom 2 that contract following the top 2. So there's the top 2, bottom 2, top 2, bottom 2. You don't need to know the names of the chambers, but you do need to know that there's 2 circuit breakers in the heart. The main electrical trunk that comes in, like the same as would be in your house, comes to circuit breaker 1. This would be like the junction box in your house. Circuit breaker number 1 then distributes the power through the top 2 chambers, and you'll see that by the green little diagram, the green little wiring diagram here. And this is followed by, and it collects up at circuit breaker number 2 before going down into the ventricles, which are the bottom 2 chambers. So we have power coming up through this red line, going to the first circuit breaker. It then goes through the top 2 chambers to the second circuit breaker. Now, as we get older, circuit breaker 1 can either fail in the open position or the closed position. Now, one little thing I didn't tell you, but there's an inherent beat in the heart. If we take the heart out for a transplantation, the heart will continue to beat at 40 beats a minute. It will never slow down slower than 40 beats. So what happens if we turn the power off? Suppose the circuit breaker fails in the off position. Well, then the heart's going to slow down to 40 beats per minute. What happens if it fails in the open position? Then there's a lot of electrical stimulus coming into the heart, and this causes what we call atrial fibrillation. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. However, because circuit breaker number 2 is here, it limits the amount of electrical impulse that can go to the bottom 2 chambers, so it keeps the bottom 2 chambers at a reasonable speed. So as seniors, I think it's extremely important that we monitor our pulse. And you should know your pulse. And you should monitor your pulse. You need to know whether your pulse is either too slow or too fast. Now, the easiest way to monitor your pulse is by using any one of the activity trackers that are on the market today. There are many that are there, and they all easily will tell you exactly what your heart rate is. Again, you should be monitoring your pulse. And here we see, of course, we have the Apple Watch. We'll be talking about that today. And we have Fitbit, Garmin, and Amazfit that are other activity trackers. Most of these are used for fitness and exercise, but in the application for seniors, we're going to just use them to measure our pulse. All activity trackers measure your pulse. Most are paired with Bluetooth to your smartphone. Most have an app on your phone that stores your data. The data is usually exportable. Some have GPS function, but all can be used as trainers for exercise. Now, the value for seniors is really to monitor your pulse. Most have accelerometers in them and can usually detect falls, and also for some have emergency notification. So let's talk about circuit breaker number 1 failing. So if circuit breaker number 1 fails in the closed position, there's no stimulus to the heart. And of course, the heart reverts back to a 40 beat per minute beat. However, the problem with this is this is usually intermittent. Now, I am sure in your lifetime you've had cars that have had electrical problems, and you've taken the cars to mechanics, and it's always such a problem because they can never diagnose an intermittent electrical problem. And this is this is difficult when you are having intermittent failure of circuit breaker number 1. You often get periods of dizziness. You go into the doctor and everything is okay. And it often takes a long time to diagnose the fact that you may need a pacemaker because circuit number one is failing. So it is an intermittent problem. And with Mary, if Mary had been wearing an activity tracker, and when she had her first dizzy spell, if she had noticed her heart rate was 50 and it always normally was 70, she could have gone in and seen Dr. Jones and said, look, my heart rate was 50 when this happened, and she would have likely been admitted and had a pacemaker inserted right away. Now, let's look and see what happens here. This is the incidence of pacemaker insertion. This is a study out of New Zealand. Let's look at age 60 and above. Look at the rate of pacemaker insertion. It goes up exponentially with age. So if you are over 60, you should be monitoring your pulse. We should be watching this carefully because there's a very high incidence that as you get older, circuit breaker number 1 is going to fail. And you're probably going to need a pacemaker at some time in the future in your life. Now, the Apple Watch, of course, will tell you right away if it's a low heartbeat. Let's talk about a fast heartbeat. Again, it comes back to circuit breaker number 1. Circuit breaker number 1 is in the open position, and your heart beats too fast. So if you have periods where you have palpitations and your heart is beating too fast, this may be atrial fibrillation. Now, atrial fibrillation is a bad disease because it causes stroke, well, blood clots, and then stroke, and sometimes heart failure. Patients usually don't know that they have atrial fibrillation. Oftentimes, the first time we find out is after they've had a stroke, they're in the hospital, the family is all very concerned and wondered what caused the stroke. And we find out they indeed had atrial fibrillation. Again, let's look at atrial fibrillation. Let's look at age 60, and let's look at the line. The incidence of atrial fibrillation goes up exponentially with age. So you want to diagnose this and get treatment for it. It's not something you want to let go because it's going to cause a stroke. Now, the Apple Watch actually can diagnose atrial fibrillation. It will actually come up on the screen of your watch and say you have atrial fibrillation. When the Apple Watch Series 3 came out and they were announcing this feature, a lot of medical people wondered how accurate this would be. There's been a big study at Stanford Medical Center which confirmed that the watch does an excellent job of detecting atrial fibrillation. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about an ECG. Many of you probably have had an ECG. If you look up in the top right-hand corner of this slide, you will see in 1860 a very apprehensive man. He has his foot in the water and his hands in some water, and he's hooked up to some sort of electrical contraption, which was, of course, the first ECG machine we had. So we have known very early on that we can see how your heart performs by the electrical conduction that we can measure. Now, if you look to the left, this is a 12-lead ECG that we have, and many of you have had those little sticky things they put on your chest, and then this produces a piece of paper like you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, we can tell what's the past things that your heart has done. Have you had untreated hypertension? We can tell the present things. We can tell when you come to the emergency department with chest pain. It helps us to decide if you've had a heart attack. And we also can talk about the future. It'll tell us the future, how well your heart is going to perform. So we can actually get a lot of information about your heart from an ECG. Well, the Apple Watch does an ECG. If you look up in the top right-hand corner, if you touch the crown of the watch, it will record an ECG. Now, on the bottom left here, you'll see the ECG is being recorded, and it sends it over to your iPhone. Your iPhone then stores this as a PDF file, and you can print the ECG off as you see here. Now, this is actually from a friend of mine who has atrial fibrillation. In this particular time when he did his ECG, the ECG says it does not have the atrial fibrillation. So we now can have an ECG done by the Apple Watch. Pretty cool. Now, the ECG done by the Apple Watch is not quite the same as we have in the hospital. On the left, you'll see the doctor with a regular 12-lead ECG. So they're not quite the same thing, and the Apple Watch doesn't quite give us all the information that a hospital ECG does. So do not be disturbed if your doctor still wants you to have another ECG. And here's an example that they both have to be used together. And again, the Apple Watch will come up and show you, yes, your ECG does show atrial fibrillation. The cost of the Apple Watch now is even being subsidized by healthcare plans. And this healthcare plan covers up to $150 for the purchase of an Apple Watch. These are 3 other insurers with similar programs. So even healthcare providers now are learning the benefits of an Apple Watch and are subsidizing this. Other companies, Samsung this year will be bringing out a similar watch that will be able to record an ECG and diagnose atrial fibrillation. You can pick up such as the Amazfit at the bottom, as you see there, for $79 on Amazon, and these are perfectly fine for tracking your pulse. We're going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence in medicine. This was an interesting book I read recently called Deep Medicine by Eric Topol. AliveCor is a company that was founded about 7 years ago. The founder was David Albert, and the CEO was Vic Gandortra. And AliveCor was able to make a device that diagnosed atrial fibrillation before the Apple Watch Series 3 came out. So this was possible before Apple introduced the first Series 3 watch. AliveCor actually made this device that you'll see here where you put your fingers on both of these pads, and this pairs with your phone, and this actually does an ECG same as the Apple Watch. I'm going to show you a short video on how this works. Now, that device can be purchased for $99 on Amazon. So if you had an Android phone and you had maybe a Fitbit and you didn't want to have an Apple Watch as well, and you had some palpitations, you could certainly purchase this for $99 and use this in conjunction with other activity tracker. Now, I want you to change track for just a minute. Let's talk about what we've done. The Apple Watch is actually a diagnostic, it's providing medical data back to healthcare professionals by actually doing the process on the watch. The idea of AliveCore was that they could actually take the data from fitness tracking apps and take it to a central computer using artificial intelligence with the right algorithms, provide that information back to you. And they did this, and there's an app that we'll talk about called Cardiogram. It's an iOS or an Android app that you download and install on your watch. This connects with Apple, it connects with Fitbit, it connects with Garmin and all the activity trackers, and it takes the data off that app, puts it on the Cardiogram app, and sends it to the big computer where artificial intelligence is waiting, and it analyzes the information. Now, what it does is it links this to your healthcare provider and yourself. So it actually analyzes this and sends the information to your healthcare provider or sends an email back to you. The cost of this is around $3 a month. Now, this is, if you're looking at the diagram on the left here, this is an example of my monitoring for this particular day. Now, what you'll see here is this, my heart rate between around 7 and 9 went up substantially, and you'll see in the red here for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. This is very, very unusual. So what was happening in this situation? Well, I was actually golfing. It was my 9-hole golfing group, and I was walking around the golf course. However, this could have been worrisome. If I had been in bed and having some chest pain or shortness of breath, this would be a very worrisome pattern. So this would be something that they would identify and send the information back to you and say, hey, what's going on here? Very interesting, and possibly the future of how we're going to be monitoring heart disease. So the goal of this presentation has been to show you how to identify a slow heartbeat, how to identify a rapid heartbeat, which could be atrial fibrillation. How could Mary have been better prepared? Personally monitoring her own health, using technology to communicate with healthcare, using technology to communicate with her daughter and family, and using technology for emergency response. Ron Brown with Silvercom Computer and Technology. This is a presentation on saving your life with wearable technology.